Okay. Before we jump in, I want to do some really quick introductions. Let's keep it really tight.
Hello, my name is Ari Herbert-Voss, and currently I run a company called RunSybil, where we're automating pen testing. Prior to this, I was the first security hire at OpenAI, where I built a lot of really weird, cursed things. I was there for 3 years, and it was a research company when I started, and it was a product company when I left.
Um, I'm Will Pearce. I am CEO, founder of a company called Dreadnought. Before that, I helped build the Microsoft AI team, and then I went over to Nvidia and built their AI team before starting Dreadnought. But my background is primarily as a network operator and security consultant.
Hello, everyone. My name is Casey. I am the founder of Bugcrowd and the co-founder of the Disclosure.io project. Yeah, background, I think prior to getting into all that stuff was really in offensive security, and wanted to find ways to bring the community together to solve difficult problems before bad guys come along and do bad stuff for real. So obviously, over the last 12 years of doing the Bugcrowd thing, we've seen new technologies pop in and jumped into working on breaking those and trying to make them better. And AI has not been any kind of exception on that front for us. So yeah, good to see you all.
Hi, I'm Caleb. I'm the founder of this thing called Whiterabbit.vc, which is basically a YC for cybersecurity companies.
Thank you all for being here. We're going to start out with just some, really easy questions. But yeah, given the breadth of experience on this panel, I'd like to know just, first impressions. What do LLMs enable us to do? And how do they enable us to do these things? How has adversarial action within this space changed since the widespread deployment of LLMs? Anybody want to just, take that one? Yeah.
I think for us, the like speed and scale are kind of the things that it enables, and so I think the mechanic that we're pushing on at Dreadnought is just that. It's like offense at scale. So being able to sort of embed some sort of domain knowledge, and then scale it. Like speed is its own version of stealth. And so I don't think people have really explored like what offense at scale looks like. And then, with LLMs being able to sort of take on human level tasks or, embed some amount of context and work pseudo intelligently at a problem, it sort of allows, you to sort of put, if you have a particular skill, it allows you to scale. So we're maybe less concerned with what happens at the floor, and then more interested in what happens at the ceiling. So if you can sort of, put James Forshaw in a box and then, let him, let that box loose on a bunch of .NET assemblies, like where do you land?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say to that, we got asked a lot about this early on because everyone was freaking out about AI and generative AI security, but no one really kind of knew what that meant. If you asked them what they're actually talking about when they express concern, it's like, we don't know, we're just concerned about stuff. So putting a bit of effort into thinking about like a taxonomy. To me, it's AI as a tool, it's AI as a target, and then AI as a threat. AI as a tool is basically anything that decreases time to success for an attacker or a defender. AI as a target is actual attacks against models themselves, and then AI as a threat is really kind of all of the unintended consequences that we bump into by plugging new shit into the existing internet without necessarily thinking those things through. So breaking it up like that, what I've seen a lot is that it really does decrease time to success, especially for new entrants. So with Bugcrowd, we've seen hackers kind of learning stuff and the time between when they decide to start doing that and when they become effective across 500,000 people or so. And what we've seen very consistently since LLMs have become kind of widely available is that time is shrinking quite a lot. So I think that same kind of rule applies for the bad guys as well. You see kind of the time to reverse out a patch and basically create a working exploit to go after end day. That's shrunk at the same time. So pretty much the whole thing's just speeding up, I think is how I'd summarize that.
That tracks with what we've been seeing too. I would say, or to add on about scale, I'd say that there's also an element of parallelization that we get a benefit out of, where agents don't need to sleep, but humans do, and humans have to eat and have to do other things too. So being able to have an agent that runs 24/7 and is able to provide insights to you and be able to learn, work alongside that is like having a really, really smart junior that sometimes you need to direct in the right direction, but for the most part, it can kind of run and find things and bring it back. And that's been a major speed up.
I actually want to dig into that a little bit more, Ari. Thank you for that. How do you think about these tools, and how does the objective-based approach of information security clash with the approach taken by ML researchers at research labs?
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. I think generally when we think of research labs, we think of these like loftier goals, like we want to achieve AGI, we want to automate like general tasks, but it seems like a lot of the approaches that are bearing fruit or within easier reach are more traditional objective based. Like we want to see if we can like evaluate the model on breaking into this website or this database or testing in this way. So what is the interplay between the research community that's testing these like larger ideas and the more objective-based approaches that are being taken by, let's say, smaller companies?
I can answer that. Most of my background is actually as an AI researcher. So when I first joined OpenAI, obviously nobody was really thinking about it very much. So when we were working on GPT-3 and on the other models that have since come out and have grown since then, most of how we measured our progress was against benchmarks. And if you have a whole group of people that are just a bunch of math nerds, they're going to come up with benchmarks that make sense to them. So like how well does it perform against certain math problems? And that's continued to be a thing that most of the major labs continue to do because that's who is building the AI at the moment. But now that we have a lot more industry pressure because there are a lot more customers at the end of the day that are using the models and customers have edge cases, that means that a variety of benchmarks has also kind of expanded. Where I think we're kind of missing is that there's still not a good cybersecurity benchmark, in part because, doing cybersecurity tasks is just such a general and pretty expansive set of tasks. So I think where we're seeing a lot more success are sort of throwing away this sort of benchmark approach and just focusing on what are you good at and what could the model be good at for you. And then just kind of going ham on that sort of thing. And then once you find sort of an area where it tends to be good, then you can either build that into your workflow, or you can use that to generate additional data to do some post-training. And that seems to be sort of how people have bridged the gap between like research results and actual like real world objective results.
Yeah, I'd just add really quickly, what's been super interesting in terms of traditional cybersecurity research and ML research, the machine learning folk and people coming in with that background tend to be a lot more honest about data, just in general. Whereas the folks coming in from an offensive security background in particular, they're a lot more focused on the outcome. So seeing those two things is sort of very deterministic kind of pass or fail view of the world with this sort of inherently probabilistic view of the world coming together. That's been really interesting to watch, because the reality is that we're both figuring it out in both directions at the same time.
Does that mean that we need to change the way that we think about how we program? Like, for example, how is programming with AI fundamentally different than just the programming that we've been doing for years and years? How do we incorporate that into our production pipelines? How do we incorporate that into the goals that we want to meet as either developers or company leaders?
I think we've kind of entered a regime where it's more like coding is as rejection sampling. So if you're not familiar with rejection sampling, it's where you generate something from like a probabilistic function, and then you just filter based off of whether or not it's hitting your objectives or not. So you're pulling a lot of samples out of this function, and then if it turns out that the samples are good, then you keep them, and if they're shit, you throw them out. And that's more or less how people use language models now for coding. And I feel like that's kind of the paradigm that we need to start building things around. I don't think anybody necessarily has good solutions yet for how to make this, improve code security. I've joked a bunch about how I'm not entirely sure that LLMs as they are today are going to find ODE, but they're sure as hell introducing a lot of ODE into programs.
What are some of the most common pitfalls that you see people making when developing with LLMs? And where do you see those? Why do you think these mistakes are so common?
Too high expectations.
Say more.
That's it. It's just like everyone's expectations are like, oh, this is going to take over the world. Oh, you can just solve that using an LLM. Oh, yeah, that's an AI. You can just use AI for that. And the reality is, like, that is not even close to being true. I have this thesis, which is still yet to be proven, but I was like, okay, when we should start seeing, I think, in third quarter of this year, some of the really, really cool applications with AI coming out that are changing our lives drastically, right? If you think about when AI sort of started to coming out and all of the startups started diving into AI and building, and enterprises started putting in money and budget into AI, that was about what, year and a half, maybe I would say about a year and a half ago. So that means it's about a year and a half development time to build something, make it production, and push it out. That means we should start seeing game-changing things happening in applications being produced maybe, this year, second quarter. But if we don't, that serves what I see is happening is there's such high expectations, but on the ground, building reliable or scalable AI applications is proving to be very challenging. And no one is being very successful at it right now in enterprise.
So we're kind of in our, Uber for X VC pitch era then. Chat with your data, also RAG, also analysis, also computer use. So what separates a good LLM application from a lazy one in this environment that we're in? And what are some of the questions that the audience should be asking of founders if they're going to be, joining these new companies or attempting to start one of their own, or maybe there's some VCs out there who, are trying to figure out what the right questions to ask are. Where does that leave us?
I think they're both connected. So the biggest thing I see people struggle with is just mature evaluations. And then, models, you can just ask again. So like it's easy to say, ask a model, get something to succeed one time. But if it doesn't give you back what you want, just keep asking it until it does. So, like our rigging library, for example, uses Pydantic XML to parse out structured output. And then from structured output, it becomes like this software component that you can start to build logic off of. And so I think there's just this you know, if it doesn't work the first time, like doesn't mean it's bad, right? Like just keep asking until you kind of get what you want.
I think a question, so going back to if you're looking to join someone doing this, a question that I'd be asking, and this is partly a question that I often ask from advisor sort of investor standpoint as well, like what's the moat? You know, when you like assuming that there's going to be competition around whatever problem you're trying to solve, and if you throw the ball forward, you know, 1, 2, 5, 10 years, where are the moats? Where's the defensibility of the value that you're actually creating? Because I do think I heard a great quote from a mentor of mine who basically said, you know, LLMs and generative AI in 2022 is a lot like having a website in like 1997. And I don't know who here in the room was actually around for the second one. Actually, show of hands real quick. Yeah, .com one. Yeah, cool. So, you know, you think about what happened, you had this incredible hype cycle. And I think there was genuine recognition of the fact that this is transformative technology. It's something that's going to change the way we do everything. But everything that you learn in that initial phase of hype, you know, very little of it is actually what ends up going on to be real. But in the meantime, it does change everything. So this idea of being able to think about it through that lens, and making sure that you're not just jumping on a hype train, actually thinking about like what's the long-term value that, you know, the company that you're looking to join is trying to build. Like how is that going to create long-term defensibility in the valuation of your stock and all those different things.
If I were also joining, these are a couple things that I would also ask, depending upon obviously the size of the company. So I'm going to assume a small startup. First of all, I would say, is what you're doing actually require using an LLM? Because you'd be surprised if you dig into it that it's like what blockchain used to be. We're just using blockchain for everything because it's using blockchain.
We're just going to rub some blockchain on it.
Exactly, which is right now rub some LLM on it. So there are several people I've talked to, when you break it down to what they're actually doing, it doesn't require an LLM to do any of these things. But let's assume they do. Okay, hey, you've got some really cool LLM. Well, you know what's great about AI is it's awesome in prototype. It's even pretty good in a V1, but at any sort of scale or consistency, these are the things that you need to question. Okay, great, you're building this. When you see this at scale, how is it going to be consistent? How is it going to be repeatable? Have you proven this? Or are there tests here for this? Look at what their model is, what they're trying to solve, how they're solving it today, and sort of imagine like, hey, again, this works pretty good, but just like, you know, he said over there is you have to ask it 150 times before you get the answer you want. That's just not a business, right? Like if that's what you have to do in order to make this thing work, like it's not going to work.
This is my third AI bubble. I started my AI career in 2016 when everybody was very excited about GANs, which if you even remember those, that's technically the first generation of generative AI. And then everybody was excited about what can we throw CNNs at? And then bunches of other things have since come and gone since then. Generative AI as it is today is actually doing a lot of stuff that people had hoped that it would do previously, but we still don't quite know what the edges are of this current generation. So I would encourage you to be slightly skeptical, but also keep your mind open at the same time. So I guess it's like, you know, basically do whatever. But I do think it's important to get a sense of, like, as Caleb was saying, like, make sure that you're actually solving a real problem that requires AI instead of just throwing it on top as like a glue layer. Because that's attractive to VCs today, maybe. It's not going to be attractive to VCs forever. And then if you've raised a bunch of money, then you have to figure out how you're going to actually, you know, build a business off of that. And if you don't actually have some sort of like moat or arbitrage, as Casey was saying, you're kind of fucked.
How have LLMs changed our outlook on security as a practice? What has it made you value more or value less? Caleb, let's start with you.
You said something about how LLMs change security, but then I lost the last part.
Sorry. How has it changed your outlook on security as a practice? And what has it made you value more or less?
I value it more. I am actually on very much the optimistic, positive view of AI and cybersecurity, which is very unusual for me, by the way. I am a pessimist at heart, as we all security people are. But I actually look at what AI is doing as a very positive thing. I actually think that there are fundamental root problems in cybersecurity that I think AI will help us change a lot for the better. Like, for example, vulnerability management. What a pain in the ass that is. But by the way, why is it such a pain in the ass? Because I need context about how my environment is, my business, my risk, in order to determine whether this is a priority to fix or not a priority to fix. So today, people are manually doing these kinds of things. I actually think this is the kind of thing AI is actually pretty decent at, synthesizing information and producing some sort of like conjoined analysis to say, I think the risk is more like this. Right. So I'm excited to see some of those movements happen in cybersecurity. I actually did this big presentation at B-Sides last year about what I think AI will do in detection response and vulnerability management and others on the very positive side of cybersecurity. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, plus one, all of that. I think the road to that being real is definitely a bit circuitous and a bit bumpy. But in general, I completely agree with what Caleb just said. Like, we've got, when you think about what your role is as a cybersecurity defender, it's basically to try to prevent all of the basically infinite possibilities for successful intrusion or a breach or whatever it is that you're trying to prevent. With finite resources, and it's a math problem, in terms of attack versus defense. So the ability to create that kind of scale in how defenders are thinking creatively about their networks, their apps, whatever it is they're trying to look after, I think it's hugely valuable for that. The one piece that I would say I'd keep coming back to is this idea of the OODA loop, so observe, orient, decide, act. And when you think about the way that we've really approached cybersecurity defense for the last 20 or 30 years, it's like there's a trash fire that happens on the breaker side, and then the folks on the defender side figure out a way to clean that up. And there's this inherent kind of cycle time between when the trash fire takes place and then when we're actually able to do something about it. I do think that AI is basically tightening the OODA loop to the point where we're going to start to have trouble fitting inside it to be able to make those decisions and actually be able to stay ahead of things, which is where AI, I think, as a tool to do that is incredibly powerful. But that's my, I wouldn't say pessimistic, but maybe like pragmatically realistic view of the world.
That's what all pessimists say, by the way. Oh, no, we're not pessimists. We're just realists.
You drink half my water. What's going on? Yeah. But I do think that's the thing to think about going forward. It's like assuming that this cycle time between attacker and defender shortens, like how do we stay inside that loop so that we're in a position to actually keep everything safe?
Yeah, I mean, it is that speed is its own version of stealth. So, if you have like, my co-founder Nick's a great operator. So if like Nick has this, amazing ability to scale himself inside of a network, then instead of like 10 alerts, you're going to get 50 alerts, right? And if your detection pipeline requires that, some poor analyst has to go through those 10 alerts and now it's 50, like you can't keep up. And so, where, you might have been able to push a misconfiguration, to some website and it go unnoticed for weeks until you're like, oh, whoops, right? Like that's just going to get noticed much faster. And so I think that's really the shortening of that OODA loop. And then it's going to highlight a lot of just weaknesses in defense, because you're not going to have, like, you're just going to be, I guess, standing flat-footed, right, when it shows up in your network. And when you think about ransomware or anything that's maybe kind of like a rash of ransomware that is maybe actually a little bit more intelligent than it is, I think that's probably where it ends up being a little more dangerous. But yeah, I think that's really it. It's like tightening, speeding everything up so that like your mistakes will get punished faster on the defensive side. And then on the offensive side, like attacks are kind of cheap again because you can just continue, right? Like there is no break anymore. So even with the tools you have today, like you could phish 24/7 and, you could take someone's Facebook, someone's LinkedIn as context, set up some sort of like, ETL pipeline, in Prefect and just press go and just wait for shells. Right. And then once you hit some shells, like it's hooked up to another process and you're in a network and, where, in some networks you have like 40 minutes to do what you need to before you're going to get kicked out. Those 40 minutes are now effectively, come to represent 3 hours, right? In like op time, let's say. So yeah, I think just the speed and just the flat-footed nature of, or just the way the defense is set up currently is going to need to change if the offensive side starts to find success, which we see success. But there's also the piece where, like, we have some clients, for example, that want to use our agents to generate observable events. Right. So even though like we are an offensive company, our outputs are implicitly defensive, and so when we generate those events ad nauseum, it means that people can train on the other side, can train on those things, so that their defenses do get better, and that loop Casey was talking about is much shorter.
I think a lot of people are afraid for what this means for their jobs, but I actually think this is a good thing. Well, not that part, but I mean more like there's a lot more pressure to get good, and there's a lot of shit work that less people will have to do. And there's a lot more tools available that will allow you to get good faster, which is pretty exciting. A lot of people complain about how there's just not enough talent in cybersecurity. I think this makes it a lot easier for talent to learn the things that it needs to get better faster. And it also augments the current problems that we have with the lack of labor force that we supposedly have in this industry.
All right. Well, I would like each one of you to think of, optimist, to think of one real life use case that is actually currently deployed today in security that's already working. But we'll pick that back up with the second part of this panel, which will be around dinner. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you to our panelists.